Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Mary Magnuson, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Is the BBC Program Right for You? Before we begin, I'll point to the chat box in the lower left corner of your screen. To interact with us at any time during today's webinar, you can simply type your question or comment in the chat box. Again, my name is Mary Magnuson. I work here at Blandin Foundation, and I administer the Blandin Community Broadband Program. Joining me today is Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors. Bill has been Blandin Foundation's primary broadband program consultant for a number of years. Among his many duties, he facilitates our Blandin broadband communities as they go through the planning and project development process. Bernadine Jocelyn is Director of PP&E here at the Foundation. That's Public Policy and Engagement. She's our boss. She likes it when I say that. And she often says broadband is fundamental to every issue Blandin Foundation cares about. The effort to ensure universal access to high-speed internet among all Minnesotans is critical to ensuring that equal opportunity to be available to all. And indeed, many Minnesotans agree with that. At our Border to Border Broadband Conference back in 2015, participants crafted the following broadband vision for Minnesota. Everyone in Minnesota will be able to use convenient, affordable, world-class broadband networks that engage us to survive and thrive in our communities and across the globe. It's a statement we still hold close in our thoughts as we do this work. The Blandin Foundation has committed $450,000 per year in grants for our Blandin broadband program through at least the year 2020. And that Blandin broadband, the Blandin Community Broadband Program is the overarching name of our initiative, and it has several elements to it, including the Blandin Broadband Communities Program, what we like to call BBCs. We'll spend most of today's webinar talking about the BBC program, but we'll also touch on some of our other community broadband opportunities. For those communities that are non-BBCs, we have the Robust Network Feasibility Fund Grant Program, and that just really quickly, that program provides matching funds for communities to hire a consultant to conduct a feasibility study to see what options are available to them to build high-speed broadband networks. We also have the Community Broadband Resources Program, and that's a nice little non-grant program where communities can fill out a really simple application to receive up to 32 hours of community planning and other kind of consulting assistance, usually from Bill. And we'll go over those later. We also hold conferences, these webinars, other communications, and do public policy work. And we are seeking 4 new BBCs, and this is the first time that opportunity has been available and open to communities throughout all of rural Minnesota since 2014. So we're really excited about it. And now I'm going to turn it over to Bill and let him go over the programs.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everyone. So Blandin Broadband Communities started back about a decade ago with the federal stimulus dollars in the Minnesota Intelligent Rural Communities program. That's where we started to develop the methodology and some of the partnerships, and really since that time we've worked with about 36 different what we call communities, but we've had all kinds of geographies dealing with that. You can see that list. City, county, school district, 5-county economic development region, tribal governments, or we've talked about a community of interest, and we haven't really had that. We thought about that would be of different schools joining together, or tourism kind of businesses across a wider region, and so on. We have had some unique geographies, what we call the central woodlands, and that's an area that went from Sandstone over to Mille Lacs Lake along State Highway, and that was an interesting experience. But as a BBC, you're really committing to partner with Blandin Foundation pretty intensively over a couple-year period. And especially in that first year, that's a pretty intense partnership of community action tied to some pretty hands-on intensive assistance from the foundation. It's really required that you have a cross-sector team in place, and when you think about economic development, it's really the same group of people who are involved in trying to ensure community vitality, education, economic development, healthcare, business, chambers of commerce, and so on. And the primary goal then to increase access and use of broadband for a more intensive use of technology to create a vibrant community. And so I just see Lisa typing there, a transplant from Maine, and welcome to Minnesota, back home. So great. Working in Arvik. Great. And providers can be a big part of this team, from a leading role to one that is supportive and looking for business opportunities. When more people use broadband, that's certainly better for the telecommunications providers in a community. It builds the market, and through our Intelligent Community Program, when we had plenty of federal money for evaluation, showed that broadband take rates in our communities rose 15% faster than in similar rural communities in Minnesota. So it's definitely a market development tool. So welcome, Lisa. Some of the things, we think there's a lot of cool outcomes that have happened, a lot of great stories, and a lot of these are documented in our evaluations and through videos and so on. But as Mary said, we've done 26 broadband communities in 3 cohorts that have been completed, and they've received almost $2.5 million for about 219 projects. So you can see the projects are generally quite small, averaging about $10,000 per project. And we've always been amazed at what rural communities can do with $10,000 of cash that comes into the community. We also partner with a group called PCs for People, and they refurbish and distribute computers to low-income families. And so each community gets 50 of these communities as a starting point to distribute. And there's great stories there of refurbished computers serving as a family's Christmas present, to people receiving their GED, to all kinds of just becoming connected and coming online for families. A lot of our BVCs now have received border-to-border grants. If people are working with trying to get better broadband in a community, this can really solidify the community support that might be necessary to attract a provider, that might be necessary to convince city councils or county boards to contribute funds to a successful border-to-border grant. And it certainly builds the political will to apply for and go after those grants. So we've been really excited about that kind of synergy between the programs. And then in the types of projects, youth app camps, where they're creating mobile apps and becoming that workforce of the future. A lot of emphasis on small business technology assessments and direct consulting and training. Public access versus Wi-Fi hotspots. We've seen a lot of different approaches to that in campgrounds or in and around libraries, public parks, and so on. A lot of intergenerational activities, senior citizens and high school seniors teaching each other about technology and life. And then we've just seen a real nice cross-sector community collaboration that involves different partners than maybe usually come together on community projects. We try and emphasize getting people out of their silos One project in Grand Rapids area, Itasca County, involved the senior corps and the library, the YMCA, and a local bank, teaching about banking and secure online behavior. So that's just one example of, a bank getting together with the YMCA is probably unusual in many cases. So now we're selecting 4 new broadband communities. We like to go through in a cohort of communities because we found out that there's a lot of cross-community learning that goes on, maybe even a little cross-community competition that drives people to say, hey, if they can do it over in the next town, we can do it here. One of the things that we use to organize our program is this intelligent community framework, and we've been using this from the very start. And I was familiar with this framework, and when we first started designing our application to the federal government, we had kind of a mishmash of partners and ideas, and we found this framework to be very helpful in organizing our application, and we found that it really is helpful in our communities. We know that on building on a base of broadband, the communities now are facing the idea of how do we attract and retain and continue to train a knowledge workforce? How can we spur innovation, more effective use of technology? And that's a big word, and sometimes it sounds kind of intimidating, but we use it to try and think about how do we move organizations and people forward from wherever they are to wherever they need to be. So if a organization or a business doesn't have a web page or a Facebook page, how do we step them up on that sophistication ladder to get them to be more competitive and deliver better services? Digital equality is huge. We know that workforce is a big issue in Minnesota, and if somebody isn't got the skills or a device or a connection to the network, it's pretty hard for them to be a knowledge worker or to be innovative and so on. So making sure everyone's connected with the device, knowing how to use it, is a big part of this program. That's another kind of a unique thing that takes it out of the economic development world a little bit and involves other people in the community. Sustainability is an interesting concept because it's new to the Intelligent Community Framework. And so it's the idea of making more effective use of resources, smart grid technology, using maybe, and I know this isn't an issue in many of our rural communities, but better traffic management. But certainly water is a huge issue. Water quality is a big issue in rural Minnesota in particular. And so how do we think about the use of technology to help drive sustainability? And sustainability certainly is tied to competitiveness as we move forward. Then advocacy, and we used to call this marketing, but now it's really what is our community's message around trying to attract people, attract investment, try and get the people in the community to invest in technology in the schools or change their local business practices and so on. And so it's really a question of whether you're going to have a forward lean on technology or whether you're just going to kind of sit and watch and see what happens with your community. Mary?
Thanks. So as far as applying to be part of the BBC program, each community needs a 501c3 or 501c3 nonprofit organization or unit of government, which can include a school district. That's often a type of organization that runs the project, and that organization needs to be willing to apply for and manage and act as a fiscal agent for any grant funds that go to your community to do projects. Often that organization will also lead the effort, including taking the lead as far as pulling together a steering team and other convening duties within the community, overseeing program processes and project implementation, and handling other logistics. That being said, there's nothing, the 501c3 or unit of government could team up with another organization such as the Chamber of Commerce that maybe doesn't have that designation to kind of manage the project with them. But we do need to have somebody that's capable of receiving a grant in that lead role. And we also, just for project success in your community, there does need to be a really strong organizational lead that's willing to put in the work. And as Bill, I'm sure we'll get to, it is, a decent amount of work, especially in the beginning. But I also wanted to be clear that when you're applying to be part of the BBC program, that isn't a direct grant application. This first application is just to be part of the program where you will have the opportunity to apply for grants later on. And all of our BBCs have received project grants near exceeding that $75,000 target that we mention in a lot of our materials. The nice thing is, though, once you get this BBC application done, a lot of that text and a lot of that work you do can be kind of super copied into your grant applications later on, so that's kind of a nice thing about that. And we expect that your first opportunity to apply for grants as part of this program would be in the fall of 2018. Bill, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So through this 2-year process, we go through the project funding and then project development and project implementation. And, oops, sorry, too quickly. And so one of the things that, I'll just take a minute and really explain the process is once a community is selected, then we do a few different meetings. And one is a meeting of the cohort where 4 to 6 people from the community will gather, and we'll look at and see where our communities are. We've had these in Grand Rapids, but we've also had them in other places where we pull people together for a full day of orientation. So as you go to sell this program in your community, you feel very well supported and knowledgeable about what the process will be and how it will work. And so once we do that, then I will come to your community and meet with your steering team. And usually that's a dozen or 15 people that are prepared to really work on this over that 2-year period. And we do a similar program with them so they're aware of what we're doing and how it's working. And we take a look at your steering team and make sure it's representative and strong, and do a little leadership training to help people really organize the program in the community. Then we would come back, and one of the big tasks is to plan a vision meeting. And usually we hope to have about 50 people in the room. We've had them as small as 30, and we've had more than 60 people in the room. And that works great from across the community, whatever that community is. Again, whether it's a city or a county or a larger area. We've done more and more of these have been done at the county level. But with that vision meeting, we really start to look at some benchmarking that we've done, and people set the priorities for the community, and then really start to think about project ideas. Then we come back about a month later and have another project development meeting, which is really the outline of your grant application. And we really follow, part of this process is that the money follows the vision and it follows the energy. So if you have people in the community that are souped up to really do a project, maybe there's only a small team or 2 or 3, but if it's a high priority one from the vision meeting in a small group ready to do it, that's all we really need. Other projects have a lot of support, but no champions, no energy. So sometimes those fall by the wayside. But we have 2 funding rounds, and that's why some of those projects that maybe are a priority but take some time to form and get the leadership and come in that second round of funding. And as Mary said, that's about $75,000 per community that is allocated. We give the grant directly to the community sponsor, whoever is that lead applicant, and then they write the checks to the local organizations. We also then do some visits within the community over that period to see how it's going and get feedback and offer coaching. My role is to provide ongoing coaching to the 4 communities as we go through this process. So I'll be out for steering team meetings and lead you through the various bigger meetings that we have up front. As we mentioned, there's the 50 refurbished computers through PCs for People. For full disclosure, I should say I'm on the board of this group. I wasn't when we started working with them, but I came to love their work and so signed on for a board membership. And it's really a fun group to be with. And this is a project that is really kind of fun because it's relatively easy. You know, it's an easy early win for communities to organize this. And if you think, these are refurbished computers with a retail value of about $75, but it's really an amazing thing, the change that it can bring to a community and give some really great publicity and good feelings for your team. Then we bring the peer groups together 4 times over the 2 years, and that includes coming to our annual broadband conferences as well, I think. So it's, as Mary said, and I think I said before, this is a pretty intense program, and it does take a lot of work. Right now we're working with Hibbing and their Chamber of Commerce, and it's kind of a love-hate deal. They hate all the work, but they love the results, and they love the community spirit that's emerging through it. And so it's people say a lot of times project coordinators will say to themselves, how did we get into this? And so it's a fair warning that it is a intensive community process, but we think highly worthwhile. And that's been the reviews as we've gone through with the communities. Mary, here's the schedule.
Do you want me to go over that?
Sure.
I am happy to. So it was just last week that we released the application instructions for the BBC program, and a little bit later in the presentation I'll go over where you can find all that on our website. And there's a decent amount of time. You have until May 31st to put together your program applications, and if you have any questions during that process, me and Bill are happy to help. We expect to notify, select and notify the new BBCs by the end of June. And hopefully we'll be able to get a kickoff meeting for those 4 communities scheduled sometime in August, so we can get going pretty quick at the end of summer when things are winding down, when the summer is winding down. And again, we'll select a site based on where these communities are, just to minimize travel. At one point, I think when we brought together our 2015 and 16 cohort of 10 communities, we were going to do it in Grand Rapids, but then I'm looking at the map and like, everyone's in southern Minnesota, let's go to Wilmer. So that kind of worked out better. The community benchmarking and community planning, those are those meetings that Bill described during the last slide. So we'll try to get those done pretty soon. I mean, we're kind of trying to hit the ground running. And again, we hope to have you applying for grants in September, and those would be approved in October. And then, we do have grant rounds on a quarterly basis in 2019, and my computer just went to sleep on me.
Uh-oh.
So I just kind of lost it. Oh, there we go. I woke it back up. Sorry about that. And then we have set dates for our border-to-border broadband conference. It's going to be October 23rd and 24th at Madden's on Gull Lake. That's where we had our conference last year, if you were there. And we've just started planning, so we're not quite sure, what specific BBC element there might be to that, but it's a great event to go to no matter what. And then I think Bill mentioned that we'd be visiting you once in a while, visiting our BBCs once in a while, and that's what that Strut Your Stuff tour is. In previous iterations of the BBC program, we've asked for kind of quarterly written reports, and after a while it became clear that that wasn't particularly energizing or helpful to our BBCs, and we weren't getting a lot out of it either. So instead of having you do written programmatic reports, we've actually decided to come and visit you about every 6 months. So once, we'll decide exactly when that's going to be once it's kind of based on when the communities are kind of getting started with implementing some of their projects. At that first kind of stage of implementation seems to be kind of a helpful time for us to go and visit and see what you're doing and hear from you, see how things are going and how we might be able to help. And we found with our Iron Range broadband communities that's been helpful and fun for them and fun for us, and kind of, again, energizes the whole group. And then, this is probably sometime around next summer, July of 2019, Bill will be out visiting again to kind of take another look at community plans. I could probably have him say a little bit more about that part. And then, probably sometime toward the end of 2019, project evaluation, and kind of wrap up. And then, this could, I think we've been calling it the 2018 to 2020 cohort. We want to give you 2 years if you need it, but usually around that 18-month mark is when things start winding down. So we'll kind of see how that part goes. Do you have anything you want to add, especially to those last two pieces, Bill?
Yeah, I think especially on the really three things. One is in this early time, the September, October time period, one of the, no one likes to think that Blandin Foundation has budgeting kind of things, but our goal is to get the grants out the door to you guys in late October, and that planning, trying to squeeze that between September into October with the planning is going to be real tight. I think we're going to design our grant process this year to give a lot of flexibility to communities and base their grant application really on the results of the visioning workshop that we do as the main foundation for that grant application. And so that one of the things that the foundation loves to do is meet the community's needs and get away from bureaucracy. And so this is one of our responses to do that. And then that July 2019 review and update the community plans. We like to do a serious check-in and kind of see what's been working, what hasn't been working in the project, what are some new ideas. And that would be the phase 2 grant round for the communities to figure out, okay, do we want to do more of what we've been doing? And I think we've seen a lot of that, especially with business technology training. We've seen a lot of work now kind of moving away from workshops to more one-on-one technology consulting with businesses, which maybe is more expensive, but is certainly it's being shown to be more effective in terms of really seeing change in the local businesses. So people can decide to do more of that, or something that was identified in the vision workshop, but no one had really worked on. Maybe there's new leadership that emerges to carry those projects forward. So that July 19th is really a second round of grant approvals and so on. And then that evaluation, that's really mostly an internal evaluation for the community. We come out and visit again, and it's really, we find out what you think has been effective, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and we've worked with all these communities, and so we bring that to the table now, and we do the same thing with your communities. One thing on geography, again, if you're a city thinking about doing this, you'll know that your own school district is bigger than your city, or if you have a hospital, that the area, your market area of the hospital is bigger than that. And sometimes that neatly fits with the county. Sometimes it's spreads across multiple areas. And so I think as you think about having the right scale to do this, probably going to be bigger than a city. In our first round, we started kind of at the city level, but they quickly ended up growing to be more countywide and also flexible in geography. That it's really what's your market area, who are your partners on broadband or school or higher education or your business market area and so on. So that's an important part to think about as we think about geography. Mary, is this yours or mine? The robust networks.
I think you can speak more.
Okay.
I think you're a better speaker about this program.
Thanks, Mary. The foundation has this feasibility study grant, and these grants are really important to look at when a community is thinking about development of a new advanced network, whether this is a provider or a community trying to spur a provider to come in, is what's the market for this? How many people have broadband now, or what's the quality of the competition for broadband? What would it cost to build this network and operate this network? Who can be our partners on this, and who's our willing partners? And how much, even if you get a state grant for 50% of the project, is that going to be adequate to finance this rural network? And so these feasibility studies have been really successful in helping communities obtain the border-to-border grants from the state. And it's up to $25,000. One-to-one cash match is required on these grants. And so that's we find that a lot of times through the BBC program, communities will break off a group of people who are trying to figure out how do we get better broadband service in our area, and that committee will kind of take a life of its own and move towards these feasibility fund grants. And so this is a really valuable program that, in fact, the foundation has moved away from some other smaller kind of application development grants for, to the general communities around the state outside the BBC program. A lot of the projects that we fund through the BBC program, like the technology training or Wi-Fi hotspots or things like that, we used to fund through something called the Innovation Grant Program, but we've really essentially closed that down to allocate dollars to these feasibility funds because they're so helpful in helping a community understand how to get better broadband services in the area. And so as BBC certainly have high priority for this grant program. Mary?
That's just what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. And so Mary and I have worked together a lot, so we think the same way a lot. So this has been really effective in our programs. And then the Community Broadband Resources is another program that the foundation offers. And Mary touched on it briefly. It's up to 32 hours of technical assistance. And it's really, where are you now on broadband and where do you want to be? And so that this technical assistance is very flexible in terms of the assistance that it's generally me that we provide on surveys or technology inventories, community vision meetings, community provider discussions, and so on. And so this program is really a great initial step for individual communities. Sometimes it's the leads to a BBC participation or a feasibility study, or for those who are happen to be lucky and or good, deed border-to-border grant applications. And so we've seen all that happen through the community broadband resources. And that's something that's available on an ongoing basis. And we do about 10 to 12 communities a year. Some of those are one meeting, some of those are use the full 32 hours and really beyond in terms of technical assistance. As long as your community is moving forward on the technology, I think the foundation is always happy to help in whatever way it can. Mary?
Yes, right. So yeah, I mean, this slide represents some of the other things that we do here at the foundation, and I already mentioned the Border-to-Border Broadband Conference. We are again partnering with the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development to put that on. Diane Wells is listening. She's part of the Office of Broadband. So we're planning that right now, and we will be sharing more details as they happen. Watch for a formal invitation probably in June. We also have we do these webinars. We have been doing them for the last few years. We've been doing them monthly, but we've kind of decided to go to more of an ad hoc schedule where we'll do a webinar like this one when the need arises, or if a community had if you had any ideas, something you'd like to learn more about in a webinar would make a good format for that, please share it with us. We're happy to do those as requested. We also have a few different communication tools we use. One is the Blandin on Broadband blog. It's www.blandinonbroadband.com. One of our other consultants, Anne, she does probably 90% of the blog posts on that blog. And it's pretty much everything you need to know about broadband in Minnesota. It's a really great tool. And then our monthly e-newsletter is something that we send out on the first Tuesday of the month, and that kind of summarizes what's happening on the blog, and with some other announcements as well.
Hey, Mary, I wanted to step back a little bit on the BBC program and talk about the grants. And as we mentioned, there's about $75,000 per community available, and those do require some match. And so the grants are
right.
If it's kind of community-wide benefit and generally short on equipment, then it's a 25% cash or in-kind match is required. So that's a pretty easy bar to meet without many dollars when you consider about time, staff time and space and hosting expense and so on. And so that level match is relatively low. If a school district or a YMCA wanted to outfit a computer lab, number one, we always like to say that it should be equipment for a purpose. The biggest crime in our book is that equipment is purchased and not used. And so we want to make sure that if there's equipment being purchased, that there's real commitment to make use of that, and hopefully broad community use. Those equipment applications usually require a one-to-one cash match on the equipment. And so that's kind of a layout of those, how the grants are required. And then I also want to talk a little bit briefly is that we've been talking with some telecom providers about sponsoring this program in their communities and asking them to contribute $15,000 cash to the initiative. And I know John Rademacher and I see him on here, that we've talked about that. And for this cohort of communities, that's not going to be required. So there's no kind of cash entry fee into this program, but there is the grant match required for the individual projects within the program.
Right, good catch about the match. We forgot to mention that. And yeah, I mean, we're always looking for opportunities to bring on more communities. I mean, we'd love it. It's just we need some partners to make that happen, budget-wise. But yeah, I mean, for those grants with, you know, the community-wide benefit that only require the 25% match, it's, you know, 1 to 3. So a $10,000 project would require about $3,333 in match. And that, yeah, and that does get really easy to do if it's, you know, in kind. It can count staff time. That, you know, adds up pretty quick. It's usually pretty easy for communities, even if it isn't obvious in the beginning where they're going to get their match from, you know. All right, well.
Are there any questions that you could chat in the chat box? Or if not, Mary and I are always available by email, and you can.
Right, and I was just about to go over where they can find information on some of these programs.
Okay.
Really quickly. Yeah, so if you go to broadband.blandinfoundation.org, if you type that into your browser, that kind of brings you to our main page. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can find links to the BBC program and the Robust Network Feasibility Fund grants and community broadband resources. And if you click into those program pages, that's where you will find application materials and other, you know, that for more information stuff, resources, that kind of thing. If you go back to the broadband.blandinfoundation.org and scroll a little bit farther down, then you can find my email address and Bernadine's. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, you can find links to our blog and our YouTube channel, and you can even sign up for e-news down there. But yeah, I mean, I do encourage you to go to the blog if you haven't already. You can sign up to receive email updates, anything from receive a notification every time something is posted to, you know, monthly summaries. I get a weekly summary of the blog. It's kind of nice in case I've forgotten to go out there for a couple days. But yeah, I think that's about it. And again, yeah, me and Bill are available if you need us. Feel free to call or email. And I will be, this presentation will be posted to our blog, and I'll email everyone that signed up for this webinar when that's available if you want to share it around with some of your colleagues.
Good. Thank you, Mark, for that. From Pequot Lakes, I've been helping them trying to figure out how their broadband providers are doing and meeting the needs of their business community, and that's through the community broadband resources. So it's fun to see the businesses give their input and then put the challenge on the providers to respond. So that's one way that CBR program works well. So happy to see you on here, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar, and have a great rest of your day.